Hi, I'm Adam. Welcome back to Godot Game Lab. Here's the counterpart of the previous video where I show you all my abandoned projects over these years. So this first one is called Angels, Bombs and Guns. And if we run the game, you'll see that we have a main menu, but nothing even happens when I click on these buttons. So basically all I did was creating a main menu, and also we have some scripts creating some game logic, namely generating a grid of some sorts. So what was this game supposed to be? Well, I started my teaching job in 2021, and in 2022, I was gaining some experience and I was confident enough to try out some new things in the classroom. I wasn't just a computer science teacher, my other major is English as a second language. I stumbled upon this game called Angels, Bombs and Guns, which is super fun. So basically you have a grid like this, and you prepare a secret grid which contains angels, bombs and guns for all those cells. And then you divide the class into teams, and the angels, the bombs and the guns have different meaning. So the teams compete with each other basically by practicing speaking. As an example, if you want to practice verbs of frequency, they have to come up with a sentence that uses the go to the theater and occasionally or something like that. And they pick the cells randomly and they don't see whether they get an angel, a gun or a bomb. So this element of surprise and competing with each other as teams makes this a fun game, right? But I couldn't really find a cool online tool to use. Instead, what I ended up doing is creating an Excel spreadsheet, and I just use white boxes to sort of overlay the icons under, and when a team picked one, I just deleted the underlying box and then the icon was revealed. But I was like, this is so clunky and I have to do this every time for all the grids. And at this time I started doing game dev stuff, right? So I was like, it's much easier to do this in Godot. So I started doing this and coding this while teaching full-time, and being a beginner at that, I couldn't really find the time and lost my interest very quickly in this project. It's a cool idea. It would be nice to finish this someday. Teachers could use it as a resource, maybe as a web export on itch. Would be nice. Maybe if I have infinite time in the future, I'll finish this. The next project is related to classrooms again. So we have this fantastic app called Factile where teachers can generate their own Jeopardy style quizzes to use in the classroom. It's super fun, it's a good way to revise, but I'm also super fed up with these games and these tools because most of them are paid. So if we go to plans, you'll see that if I want to use this and have access to most of the features, I have to pay, right? And it's not a big deal or not a big sum by any means, but as a Central European teacher with a relatively low salary, I was like, okay, these can pile up, right? Because this is just one app, and if I want to use some other interactive stuff like Kahoot for quizzes, then I have to pay for that as well, right? And these pile up pretty quickly. I figured why not just do this inside Godot again, so I can use it for free and provide a free alternative to all teachers who cannot afford paying money for software like this. So I hopped into Godot and started doing my own alternative version of the app. And this time I got pretty far forward. I worked like a month on this besides my full-time job. So we have much more done. So I have localization, we have English and Hungarian, we have sound and music, and also probably the most interesting part is that you can create your own games. You can name the categories whatever you want, like health or I don't know. And when you click on the questions, you can assign text, and you can also drop images which will be saved to a folder and loaded back dynamically. So this uses a drag and drop functionality. You can set a time limit, and you can also set the prices. So if I say that it's $200, then it starts from 200, and I can change the increment to 300. So then we have these different values. You can also set the currency to euros and Hungarian forints as well. And it's not limited to a 5x5 table, so you can dynamically also change the number of rows and columns you have. And you can name your game whatever you want, like my awesome game or something, and you can save it on a disk as a resource. And you can go back to the main menu and you can load back games and edit them, and you can create new games. This is what you want to use in the classroom, right? So when you're prepared with your quiz, you can set the number of teams you'll have, and you can change the icons for the teams. They can pick their icons, and you can load the game you want. So that's about as far as I got with it. What's still missing is actually loading back the game and starting the game when it's ready and doing all the gameplay logic related stuff. But as you can see inside the file system doc, I have a lot of functionality actually implemented inside the game. So we had sounds, themes, some shaders, translation. So I was pretty keen on finishing this, but then teaching full-time got really busy, and unfortunately I abandoned this project too. So this next one is a bit of an oddball because it's actually a finished project. I just wouldn't say it's a game project per se. That's why I haven't included it in the other video. So this was made for a couple who are good friends of ours when my partner and I got married. And we wanted to do a creative way of asking them to be our witnesses. So we settled on making this funny little ZooKeeper-like game with their cat and their faces drawn as pixel art. But you can imagine how this game plays like, right? You just have to assign these dirty dishes to our friends with their cat. And that's basically the gameplay. And when you play through all the levels, the question just pops in, would you like to be our witnesses for the wedding? So it was a fun little way of asking them, and they were pretty surprised. So it turned out to be a really fun way. So this is the first real game dev project, which is not related to teaching or anything in our real life. So this is a tower defense game. I believe I started this for a game jam, but I never figured it out. So the way it works is that you have your base. You can see the prototype art being used here, and you need to build your towers connected to your base. So you're building like this giant robot basically, and all the towers need to connect somehow to the core of your base. That's why the game is called, or is supposed to be called, Hardwired Abomination. So when you build the towers, you can see that I already lost the game. But maybe it happened too fast, so let me show you again. So the idea was that you can buy upgrades, you have the scraps. So you're basically building this giant scrap robot metal thingy, and you can buy shotguns, for example. So the problem is when you build too many towers or too many components, the tower can overheat. So this was another gimmick. You'll see this heat bar here, and when the shotgun tower starts shooting, you'll see the heat go up. So if you build too many towers, then you can't power them all. But if you mismanage them, then you'll quickly lose all your base, like in this case, right? So you can see that the main gameplay mechanics work, but I stopped working on a game because, I don't know, I just didn't feel that inspired by the idea anymore. I felt like it wasn't original enough with the heat gimmick and the continuously attaching scraps connecting to the whole giant piece of metal robot. It sounded cool in my head, but when I implemented it, it wasn't that cool anymore. It felt like a general tower defense game to me. And I have this habit of, instead of building this prototype out quickly and dirty and realizing that it's not that inspiring, I spend actually a lot of time of creating, you guessed it, cool architecture for the game. So we have stat resources, we have inventions you can attach to the scrap thing, like the shotgun. So all of these are created with their own custom SVG icons. So I was like, oh, this would be so cool to create these resources with their own icons and stuff. So I spent a lot of time polishing the code and the architecture before actually testing how the game works, right? And this is a pretty beginner mistake, because even though the code base is cool and there are a lot of neat solutions, you can add a ton of content, but if the core gameplay loop is not interesting enough, then you just wasted a bunch of time, right? So that's what happened with this game, but I don't consider this game to be a failure because I really started to think about architecture with this project. I use resources a lot. I try to decouple a lot of stuff. I've experimented with event buses. So even though we have a lot of abandoned projects like this, there are some cool ideas related to code and architecture inside, which I learned and sort of carried over to my future projects. Then we switch over to Godot 4, and I have this project called Keep Him Snoring, and this was supposed to be made for a game jam. And since I recently made the switch to Godot 4 from 3.5, I figured I must start with a small project to test how all the new stuff works. And this was supposed to be a game where you have this little turret and you'll see the prototype art again, and enemies would be coming at you, and you basically have to shoot the nightmares to keep the guy dreaming. So you would be sort of like the guardian of the dreams of a person, and you have to shoot, but only shoot the nightmares. So there would be nightmares and good dreams, and you have to shoot the nightmares to keep the guy dreaming. So we have this basic main gameplay loop where the square moves on its own, and you have the turret with the limited range of movement, and you can shoot these bullets to shoot the nightmares. But as you can see, the nightmares never did come to life. So there's not much to this project. Basically, that's it. Needless to say, I never submitted anything to this game jam. The next game idea I had is a puzzle platformer of some sorts, and it's called RuleBender. And the main gimmick of this game is that you can collect duct tape inside the level, and when I press R, it opens up the rule book. So right now we only have one rule, is that you can't jump. So when I close the book and press space, no matter how many times I press it, the character wouldn't jump. But when I collect the duct tape, which is a diamond shape, and go back to the rule book by pressing R, you'll see that I have one duct tape now. So if I click on you can't jump, I'll use one duct tape and change the rule to you can jump. So now if I close the book and press space, I can progress with the level. So my idea was that you can bend the rules of the game by collecting duct tape, and you can sort of manage for yourself how the character behaves. So the change you make is not permanent. So if I press my rulebook again and click on you can jump, again I can switch it back so I can jump if I don't need it, and I get back my duct tape. And as you open up more and more rules, you can make more puzzles inside the levels. So that was the main idea. Again, I didn't feel that inspired about it. I was like, it's a cool gimmick, but I'm not sure if that's enough to stand out in the ocean of great platformers. So the next one is a pretty simple experiment. I watched the trailer for ZooKeeper, which is a really cool looking game, I think. And I saw this effect of moving close to tiles and having only the edge highlight when you move close to it. And I wanted to replicate this effect with light 2D nodes in Godot 4, but actually I couldn't do this. So if anyone knows how to do that effect or would make a tutorial on it, I would be so happy, because I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, but I couldn't. So we have this light 2D, which I guess sort of lights up the polygon. So maybe one way to do this would be to duplicate the polygon, because this have a canvas item material and the light mode is set to light only. So maybe if I duplicate this and set its material to the default one, I guess that kind of works. So I just wanted to test how 2D lights work and how you can achieve this effect, because I haven't really used lights really extensively in my projects. Then I had this idea for a platformer where the character would auto run and the only button you can press is the jump button, which sounds easy, but it's surprisingly difficult. Also with this project, I really experimented with state machines. So you can see the current state on the top of the screen, right? So you see the character also starts climbing on its own, but now we're stuck inside this loop where you climb to the top of the ledge, fall back and start climbing up again. But you know, you can jump. So when you jump off a wall or when you're in the climbing state, then the direction reverses. So basically you can travel to the whole map and try to navigate yourself and avoid obstacles by only pressing the jump button. And I think this idea is pretty nice, but apparently I'm not the only one who thought of this, because there's actually a pretty cool game in the making by a creator named Saltoons. So if you want to see this idea explored in a fully fledged game, I definitely recommend checking out his channel. He makes some awesome content. And it seems like I was obsessed with the idea of one-button games, because this next game is called ZooKeeper. And the main idea is that you play as a zookeeper and you have to feed the animals, right? And so all of these animals start coming to you for food. And if you can't feed them in time, then they love you to death. So that's why you have these hearts here. So you start at 0 hearts, and if 3 animals reach you, they sort of overwhelm you with their love. And you'll see the upcoming foods you can shoot at them or throw at them. And different types of animals want different types of food and different amount of them, right? So when you successfully feed them, then they will just turn around and leave. And it's a super fun, like silly idea, I think. You can see how much time is left in your shift. So the first one is pretty easy. I don't even have to do anything for testing purposes. Then you can pick an upgrade. So chilly weather, for example, slows them down. So they're coming at you lower. Then you have a lot of statistics thrown at you, and you can continue with the next shift. So you'll see the first food I'll shoot is some meat. And it's probably not what the elephants want. They probably want the hay. So I try to shoot at them. I press and hold left mouse button, and when I release it, that's when I shoot. So you'll see if I hit the penguin, he's basically done with its food and just turns around. And you can see that the elephants with this very basic 2-frame animation come at me and I get overwhelmed before my shift ends. And you can see that I aborted my shift. You have some accuracy statistics and so on. So it's a fun, silly little idea. You have history with your previous runs and so on. But this project got abandoned as well. But it was super useful to do this because you can see that there are a lot of features in the game. And for example, one of the features I came up with is using the modifier system. So if I click on this modifier scene, adding a new modifier, adding a temporary one, clearing them, or getting these value might look familiar to you if you completed my Slay the Spire course. So this is where I came up with this idea of having the modifiers attached to the scene as nodes, having a timer for temporary ones, for example. And you can use this as a very robust system for a lot of different genres of games. So I learned a lot with this project, despite the fact that it still looks very silly and it was abandoned. So these little projects and experiments can actually turn out to be pretty useful, I think. And I have to admit, I still had some fun shooting those bananas at penguins when I opened up the project. The next one is a school-related oddball project again, and this is actually finished. So one of my students asked me to basically make a copy of Family Feud they can use for a school event. Right? Because he was part of the student council and he wanted to make this fun Family Feud-like quiz game for the juniors in the school. So basically it's a Hungarian little application where you have these questions and you have the points for the teams and you can change the score for the points and you can do the basic Family Feud-like gameplay. So I think this was a fun little project. There's not much to say about it because the questions were given. One thing that's cool about it is it looks pretty polished, I think. We have cool little gradients, nice colors, and pretty fonts and all that good stuff. So one thing I definitely learned with this project is honing my UI skills a bit, even though I'm not a designer by any means. And this next project was supposed to be my first ever Godot plugin, but for some reason I have a bug which I can't figure out. I've tried many times and I still can't put my finger on the problem. So basically when we did the big black book of magic, the gameplay had this spell drawing mechanic, right? And so I figured this was super fun and it would be useful for other games, so I should turn this into a plugin. And so I did. If you take a look at this dock here, we have a new menu here called Gesture Editor. And if I go over here, the plugin would have these features to add a new gesture, delete one, save them all, or load the default. And you can actually draw the gestures here. So if I click on Add New Gesture, we can provide a name for this. Let's call it, I don't know, cross or something like that. Then we have this new gesture here and I can draw the cross and we can save the gestures. See, the problem is the recognition for whatever reason just doesn't work super well, even though it worked well for the game. So if I add a new gesture with, I don't know, cross 2, and if I try to draw the cross and recognize it, it will recognize it as an N shape with like an 18% score, which is super weird, right? Because it's similar enough to the cross we just drew. And even if I clear this and, I don't know, draw an asterisk, which should look like this, it will kind of recognize it as an asterisk, but only with 36%, which is pretty bad. This should be like a 90% match at least. And no matter how close I draw it to the original, we get 25%. So something's off with the algorithm or the scaling, and I couldn't figure out what. But actually, it would be super useful to have this as a plugin because I think this gesture editor, from a UI perspective, is super nice. And you can have all the gestures saved to your game, and then whenever you want to use this mechanic inside your game, you can just instantiate this window from a scene and you can use it, and you have a signal where you get this data, right? So inside your game you can use the information of recognizing a drawing however you want for your gameplay mechanics. So I couldn't really figure out what's the problem, and I was so frustrated by it that I abandoned it, but basically everything else works. And just a couple of months ago, someone posted this on the Godot subreddit saying that they turned this into an add-on and they have a GitHub link. So maybe I should contact this person because they did it, right? So we have the same functionality, but I think just by guessing with the documentation and this GIF we have here, the plugin is not as sophisticated as this one is supposed to be. So maybe it would be more useful to devs to have this fully fledged functionality, but I don't know why it doesn't work, because it did work for the game, for Big Black Book of Magic. Maybe I should publish it anyway and someone else can find the bug, but I didn't really bother with that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Should I publish it? Then I hop back into Godot 3 for another Godot Wild Jam, and the theme was cats. So I was inspired by my childhood cartoon Tom and Jerry. So I made this little game about a cat, a platforming game, where you have like cutscenes and all he says is meow. So it's kind of funny. And basically, you have a solid platforming idea with some levels. Again, he just says meow. Then you can jump. And this is where the gameplay gets a bit more interesting, because dogs are introduced to the mix. And you can push the boxes as a cat to be annoying. And when it hits the dog, you have this cartoon-like star animation over their head. And when all of the dogs are stunned, then you can move on to the next level. And this was the tutorial level, right? So this was supposed to be the entry. As you can see, I basically completed the project. The timer didn't work, but you can go back to the main menu. You can start a new game and start the whole thing over again. But I actually haven't submitted it because I was like, okay, there's nothing really interesting about the game. I didn't make the assets. These are all Kenny's. So I wasn't really inspired by this project, but at least I worked on something, right? So when the Slay the Spire course was coming to its end, towards the finale of season 2, I already started thinking about what to do next. And so this idea was to make a match 3 type of game, kind of like Candy Crush. And I was toying with the idea of using numbers instead of icons, so I made this little system where we can sort of swap them around. But you can see that the main mechanic is there. I mean, spawning the table and recognizing matches definitely works. And if I run it a couple of times, even chaining matches works. So when we run the game and a couple matches happen, if new matches happen, then this chaining of events will continue. But since you didn't really seem that keen about making this Candy Crush-like game, I haven't really moved on further to implement the matching mechanic, for example. But we have this nice little tween animation to switch back and forth between numbers and icons. Another interesting idea I had is to make a 3D game, or a 3D course this time, but all I really did was actually importing some of the models, so let me show you where I got them from. So I saw the one and only Kenny releasing this mini arena kit, which looks like this, and I was super inspired by this. So I was like, how cool it would be to make this 3D from an isometric fixed camera perspective game, which is a local multiplayer game. So you have spears and daggers and you can fight around with your friends inside an arena. And I really quickly ditched this idea because I didn't feel confident enough to pull off a 3D local arena multiplayer game course, having very limited experience in 3D myself. And also I think this was even more niche than my original courses. Like doing the roguelike deck builder is a pretty niche course. Doing YouTube in a way that I just release videos of courses which are very long, which is not really preferred by the algorithm, is already a very niche thing. So I was like, it would be super hard for me. And at the same time, I wasn't sure that it would resonate with many of you or with many people. So I ditched this idea, but let me know what you think. Should we do something like this in the future? I think it would be a super fun game and the assets also look really nice. So I don't know. I just ditched the idea at the importing stage of the assets. This idea of doing that local 3D multiplayer arena game was still on the back of my mind, so I was like, okay, why don't I enter another game jam, and this time I can try making a 3D game. So this was supposed to be Penguin Hopper, a game about making through these platforms in the ice. So these are supposed to be like ice tables, so kind of a reference to global warming, and you can control multiple penguins, and all the platforms have a health bar. So this would be a puzzle platformer game where you have to pay attention to the health bar of the ice tables, because if you jump on them when they are low on health, you would just sink, right? So you have this pretty simple platformer control. You can move with WASD, you can press space to jump, And if I jump over, you can see that the health bar decreases for that ice table. And you can use tab to cycle between the different penguins. So if I jump over to this one, you'll see that the health sort of halves itself. And you can cycle between the different characters. And you have this third-person perspective. You can jump back and forth between the different platforms. It was a fun little idea, but eventually life got in the way. I got super busy. I started my PhD studies, so I didn't have the time to finish this for the jam, but I think it's a fun little idea, and at least I got some experience working in 3D in Godot. So that was nice. And one last project I want to show you is not an abandoned one, but it's a super interesting one, I think. You might remember that I said I want to do beginner game dev courses in the future, and I sort of made a system inside Godot to create visualizations or better visuals to explain the basics, because I mostly use PowerPoint or presentation software to make my visualizations, and it can be limited sometimes. And I'm not really good with motion graphics, so I figured I know Godot, the animation player system, is really robust, so why not use what I already know? And I have this little project called Reusable Backgrounds and Scenes. I can show you a couple scenes I have for the beginner course. So for example, when I want to explain how scene composition works, how you build a scene from nodes, I have this little animation, and I can use the arrow keys to sort of switch between the slides or the different steps of animation. So we have Joe as a character body, and when I press the right arrow, then we have a sprite 2D as a child, and you see the guy appear. And when we add the label, we have text, and when we add the animation player, he starts walking. If I press ESC on the keyboard, I can go back and replay the animation, but I can also use the left arrow to take a step back in the animation. So I wrote this system to use these animations to help me record videos. And we also have one for the area 2D, for example, to sort of demonstrate how the area entered and exited signals work. You'll see when John enters his circle, he says, "Hi, John," but when he leaves, it says bye. So again, this is a super cool and easy way for me to kind of spice up the videos a bit. And it would be a Flappy Bird kind of video. So we also have a scene where I show how you can trick the player into thinking the plane moves and instead moving the obstacles. So for example, if we have no camera and the plane is moving, it looks like this. This is how it looks like without the camera when the plane is moving, right? But then we can also use a camera and move the plane, so this is what it would look like inside the game. But actually in this case, it's much easier to move the obstacles and lock the plane on the x-axis. So when the plane is still, but we move the obstacles, we kind of get the same result. This is the presentation I want to use to explain that game dev is often about illusions, and you should not always go with the obvious solution because the code might be easier to execute if you think out of the box. So I thought this was an interesting project to show as well. And basically that's it for all my abandoned projects. I'm pretty sure I have a couple other ones lying somewhere, but these are the ones I could find in my game dev cemetery. So what kind of abandoned projects do you have in your game dev cemetery? What did you think about these ones? Let me know in the comments below. Again, a huge thank you for everyone for supporting me throughout this year. And now I will go back to continue with the Auto Battler series. So I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.